So I think the Iranian gamble, it wasn't entirely misjudged, but it was a gamble which was out of desperation. They need to survive. And if they just sat back and only fired at Israel, there was no guarantee they had any leverage to try to survive. That's why they attacked the Gulf states. As we'll say, we'll see how it works out. At this point, I think there's still the possibility that if you the Trump, let me put it this way, the Trump administration would let the regime survive if Iran agreed to give up its nuclear program and its ballistic missile programs. The Trump administration is not pursuing regime change. The problem right now is that the regime does not want to give up that nuclear program or its ballistic missiles, certainly not yet. And that's why the diplomatic initiatives are not ending the American attacks at the moment.
Another interesting piece of was published in Politico, and according to this journalist, the administration of Donald Trump may not have been fully prepared for a major war with Iran, which could last until this September. And the United States Central Command has asked for more intelligence officers in Florida, basically to support this long operation. Could this war deliver the results Trump wants, or it risks turning into a prolonged, maybe even frozen conflict ahead of the midterm elections?
Well, the first point is that the U.S. military told the Trump people that they weren't prepared for a long war even before the war started. I mean, they didn't say that publicly, but privately, the top military officer, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, said, we're short of certain resources. We mentioned the interceptors, the drone and missile interceptors. We don't have enough if the Iranians keep attacking. We may not have enough offensive capability to knock out all of the Iranian missile launch sites. So the Trump administration gambled. We mentioned an Iranian gamble. This was the Trump administration gamble. We can get rid of the regime or force them to surrender very quickly. But what if the regime doesn't surrender very quickly? Then you have to have a plan B. And they don't have a plan B. Because do they just carry out more bombing? That may not work. Do they put American ground troops into Iran? Well, that runs a huge risk because of the experience of Iraq in 2003 and Afghanistan. The American public is very, very much does not want ground troops in Iran. And Donald Trump said last year, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to have forever wars. So the latest possibility, and this is why they may have to prepare through September, is they're trying to work with Iranian Kurdish fighters who are based in Iraq to train and arm these Iranian Kurds to go back into Iran for an insurrection, an insurgency. Now, maybe they could control part of Iran, but there's a huge risk that you start this war in part of Iran with these CIA military-backed Iranian Kurdish fighters, and then you see what happened in Iraq, that the whole country winds up with different factions fighting each other. So I think that's a really good question you put to me, and I come back to the fundamentals. The Trump people wanted to demonstrate power. They wanted to demonstrate dominance. But they didn't have a clear plan to succeed with that dominance besides killing the supreme leader. And because of that, they may not have the resources to pull this off if the regime does not collapse in the next few weeks.
In Washington on Wednesday, Republican senators blocked a motion that would actually have stopped the U.S. air campaign against Iran and required congressional approval for further military action. The vote leaves President Donald Trump with broad authority to direct the war as the conflict spreads across the Middle East. The question is, does this effectively give Donald Trump wide freedom to act before the midterm elections?
For the moment, the Republicans in the Senate have blocked the resolution that would limit his war powers. We'll see what happens in the House today, where the Republicans have a very thin majority. But I say for the moment, there are many Republicans, as well as many people in the United States, who are very concerned about these operations. I mentioned that Donald Trump said the U.S. would never do this while he was president. They would never have this kind of war. I mentioned the fact that the memories of Iraq and Afghanistan are present. There was a very striking fact over the weekend. In the first polls taken after the U.S. attacks, a majority of Americans, including 25% of Republicans who had an opinion, said they opposed the operations. Ever since I was a boy, every time an American president has gone in and launched a war or military intervention, Americans have rallied around the flag, and there's been a huge majority supporting the operation. This time, no. A majority opposed this. Now, legislators respond to public opinion, but there also is a split in the Trumpist movement. Some Trump people are very opposed to being allied with Israel to attack Iran. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, the commentator Tucker Carlson, for example. That means, and I come back to what we just mentioned a moment ago, if there is not a quick victory, if the regime does not collapse or surrender very soon, then you have Americans saying, including Republicans, our concern is the economy. Our concern is immigration. Why aren't you concentrating on these? Instead, why are you going off and fighting a war thousands of miles away? And I don't think that's even a question, Sofia, of this affecting the elections in November. I think well before November, if there's not a quick victory for Trump, he's going to be in serious political trouble, and you will begin to see a rebellion by Republicans against giving him unlimited authority.
Let's cover also another interesting question of the role of Israel in convincing President Trump to go all in the Middle East. And also California Governor Gavin Newsom said Tuesday that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushed U.S. into war against Iran. And also he argued that U.S. should consider halting military aid for Israel in the future. Do you share this view that Bibi Netanyahu dragged U.S. into this war against Iran?
Yeah, I think it's really important, because this question of Israel is always so big in American political culture, to really establish the facts as we know them. The facts are that both in 2025 and in 2026, the Trump administration pursued a dual policy. On the one hand, it talked tough about Iran. You know, if you don't give up your nuclear program, we might have to take steps against you. On the other hand, it went into talks with Iran about that nuclear program. There were 5 sets of talks in 2025. Israel cut them short by attacking Iran with that 12-day war. And yes, the U.S. did join that war by bombing Iranian nuclear facilities. But then Donald Trump also was the one who told Benjamin Netanyahu, you have to cease fire. So what happened this time? The U.S. is in talks with the Iranians again. There's going to be 5 sets of talks about the nuclear program. On February 11th, Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington. And Netanyahu is making a big thing about, we need to hit the Iranians. We need to take care of this. Now, at this point, the Americans are still in negotiations with Iran. Those negotiations go all the way up till a week ago, last Thursday. So that would be February 26th. In that set of talks, the Americans went in again. This is Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And they again said, Iran has to give up its nuclear program. They have to give up its ballistic missiles. But despite the fact that the Iranians don't accept that demand, they came out of the talks, and so did the mediators who are from Oman, and said, we think we're making progress. We think there's value in having another set of talks. 2 days later, the U.S. and Israel attack. So what happened here? What I think happened here is that the Americans, not because they were pulled by Israel, because of their own desire, get rid of the Iranian nuclear program, get rid of the Iranian ballistic missiles, and show American power, show American dominance. We can dominate this region. They made the decision, we're going to stop the negotiations, we're going to go to war. That I think is the logical explanation based on the facts. The reason why this got muddled is because this war is illegal under international law. So the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, earlier this week tried to give some type of explanation why this was legal. And he said, oh, okay, Iran was not threatening to attack us, but we knew that Israel was going to attack. And when Israel was going to attack, we knew Iran would retaliate. So we had to carry out a preemptive strike to stop Iran retaliating. Now, that was a ridiculous attempt to justify this under international law, because logically, if you want to stop the war, you ask Israel not to attack Iran. But that's what Rubio said. The problem here is that some people then looked at it and said, oh, Marco Rubio just said that the United States did not plan to go to war with Iran, but it had to do so because Israel was going to strike. So Israel dragged the U.S. in. And then Donald Trump says, no, it was my idea all along to attack. That's why this all got muddled this week. But no, the fundamental is Israel had its reasons for going to war with Iran. The Netanyahu government wants regime change. Prime Minister Netanyahu has political and legal issues. He wants to push those aside by having the war. And the Trump camp wanting to exert power and dominance and end Iran's nuclear program once and for all, they also had their reasons for attacking.
But according to Axios, after that phone call between Trump and Netanyahu, Trump decided to go all in and to go to war with Iran because Netanyahu presented Trump with this option to strike to eliminate Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and he presented Trump with Israeli intelligence information about the location of this meeting, where all Iranian officials, probably most of Iranian officials, military officers, and also political leadership would meet in this residence and would discuss the next steps. Don't you think that Netanyahu had a final say in this decision of US to go to war with Iran?
No, I still don't think the decision was made then. I referred earlier to February 11th. I should have meant Netanyahu made the phone call with Trump, not the visit to the White House. And that's the call you're talking about. But that's February 11th, right? Now, on February 11th, the Americans are still in talks with the Iranians. They're still talking about the nuclear program. Let me put it to you this way. The Americans made a contingency plan, which is, okay, we will make planning to go to war alongside Israel. And that includes the targeted assassinations that you're talking about. But at the same time, they're still involved in the talks. Had Iran agreed in the talks to give up its nuclear program and to restrict its ballistic missiles, then the Trump administration can declare a victory. They can declare a deal. So rather than the Obama deal in 2015 that did limit Iran's nuclear program, but that Trump despises, and that he withdrew from in 2018, Trump has his own deal. He can say, peace with Iran. They're restricting their nuclear program. In fact, they're getting rid of it entirely. And then if that happened, there's no need to go to war alongside Israel. Let me give you a piece of information that brings this all together. Remember Trump's real estate developer friend, Steve Witkoff, his envoy. A week before the war, so this is around February the 21st, he gives an interview in which he says, Donald Trump is getting really, really frustrated. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand why Iran does not capitulate. In other words, surrender. Witkoff was saying this out loud. Trump doesn't understand why Iran doesn't agree to everything that Trump wants. And if Iran doesn't surrender, then they could get hit really hard. And that's exactly what happened. So yes, Israel wanted to carry out these assassinations and get regime change. They wanted the same thing in 2025. They wanted it again in 2026. This time, they got the Americans in from the start, not because they dragged the Americans into it, but because Trump had his own motives. And that is, if the regime is not going to surrender to me, I'm going to bully them. I'll make them give up that nuclear program by carrying out airstrikes alongside the Israelis.